Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission Friday meeting, work session, gathering of commissioners. I don't think we need to take roll or otherwise. I know we're all here. Good to see everybody, and we don't have necessarily an agenda. It's just a quick check-in amongst ourselves and find out what we're doing, where we're going, if there are any reports or otherwise from folks to each other. So the floor is kind of open. Karen.
Thanks. I'm wondering if we want to debrief a little bit about our joint meeting with the Air Quality Commission yesterday, and kind of maybe what we would like to do for next steps.
Have at it.
So I thought it was great to meet. I learned so much. I do think there's obviously a benefit that we're full-time and we're like, we should do this and we'd be great to do this. And I can feel that that's maybe feels a little more overwhelming to the other commissioners. I do think that there are some policies or issues that maybe we as commissioners can keep on the front burner so that we don't lose track of them, that came up yesterday. And I thought John really summarized it really well at the end of our meeting yesterday. And, you know, making sure that all the pieces of Senate Bill 181 where our Venn diagrams kind of overlap, that we are ensuring that we have proper communication and that we are encouraging our staff to continue to work together so that we can share resources and not be redundant and or ask for information in different ways so that we're not able to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I'm very interested in exploring, and I'm wondering if maybe even at a staff level with some commission support, we could explore whether or not, and I mentioned this very briefly yesterday, but I think it could be useful. CDPHE is pretty successful at using supplemental environmental projects where penalties from an operator are used for a specific project instead of just paying a penalty. And I feel like there's all this information that everybody keeps asking us for that we don't have resources for, that are unfunded. And if an operator is willing to use their penalty for that purpose, we can come up with projects that help us make decisions. And I would be very interested in exploring that with CDPHE and seeing if there are some projects that we might be able to fund that way in the future. And so I don't know if anybody else would be interested in that. I think the cumulative impacts piece is really important, and how are we gonna, the data that we're collecting versus the data that CDPHE is collecting, what we're asking for that will be put into CITER. Yesterday, I think another light bulb went on for me, perhaps, maybe it should have gone on sooner, which is we're asking, in some instances, we're asking operators to estimate what they think is going to be emitted or what's gonna happen. And CDPHE is calculating actual numbers, maybe, if I understood yesterday. And how are we gonna use that data together? How is that gonna work together when we're looking at, for example, cumulative air impacts? I'm very interested in whether or not the data that CDPHE is collecting, in particular from the Martinez-Irwin funds, can hone in on some things that we're getting questions about, like how much does an orphan well emit? How much does an inactive well emit? I just think that there are some really big opportunities for some partnerships. And I'm not sure how to make sure we keep them alive and what our role is in that. I'm sure other folks have other ideas, but.
Yeah, Karen, I'll jump in, and I appreciate that kind of final idea of coordinating, you know, the estimates that are coming out through, you know, through the OGDP applications, and then what the actuals that come from CDPHE are, and how we can coordinate those and do, you know, maybe on a consistent basis, or have some process to have look backs on each of those operations, you know, where we have those monitoring systems, we get the results in. As soon as we do, part of that process is looking back at the estimates and then trying to figure out, hey, you know, how were those estimates being made? How close they tie to reality? And is there any way to close the gap if there is a gap in that regard? So that'd be something that I would support, and I think would be a really, really great idea. The other part, you kind of brought up two things. So the first thing you brought up before that was about the potential for using penalties to be what it sounded like specifically earmarked for projects. Yeah, I don't know if I got that right, but I think I like that idea. And I was wondering, do we have any limitations for how we assess penalties, and if the monetary amounts or the monetary penalties themselves, if they have to go to a specific place at COGCC, or could they be earmarked with coordination with the operator for a specific project that maybe we have, maybe we develop a list of things we want to learn about, things we want to follow up on. So my kind of piggybacking on everything you said, Karen, and offering support for that as well.
I see that Julie is now with us, and yeah, I mean, historically, that is something that we have done with regard to operators and penalties in terms of earmarking monies for special projects. That was the hallmark of the Martinez-Irwin Fund, is we took those monies and allocated them out to those special projects that had connection to protection. And so, yes, that's not new or different. That's how we've used those sorts of things in the past. Julie, do you want to speak a little further to that, or do you want to get Jeremy in here at some point to give us a little update on how that works? It's pretty straightforward.
I think it is straightforward. If it helps to have a presentation like that, we can at a high level. I think the things to keep in mind are that if penalties are paid to COGCC, they become part of our budget and must be spent in accordance with our Joint Budget Committee limitations, right? So, and also when penalties come into COGCC, they cannot be spent on staff or operational related expenses. They have to be spent on environmental type projects. So they would be spent on orphan well projects, any sort of environmental research or studies that Greg's team does. Those are generally where penalties are spent. So when penalties that come into COGCC, and so I think we should be very, very precise in our language on this. Penalties that are paid to COGCC have to be spent in accordance with our budget and on specific things. Penalties that are assessed, but that are collected as a special project or like a public project pursuant to the enforcement rules, are not within our budget, are not subject to those same strictures, but have to comply with the requirements for a public project under our rules. And so that's where Kerr-McGee has continued to hold the settlement dollars and then spends them out and writes the check directly to the special project person, like whether it was University of Arizona or buying the labs and vans specifically from the vendor, so that because it's not part of COGCC's budget, right? So just keep that in mind as we're working through it. And then the other piece is an $18 million penalty is fairly unprecedented. And so making sure that we understand that penalties will need to scale project to penalty amounts on some level. It's not like we can collect the penalties and hold them until we have enough to, spend $3 million on a research project, for example. So we'll need to work through those things, but I think it could behoove us if commissioners kind of put together a list of like research or inquiry areas for special projects, and then we can figure out how to bite it off. If an operator is interested in performing a public project in lieu of paying a penalty if it's assessed. And then the other piece is on, on the other side, well, no, I'll leave it there. I think that's the high level kind of structure I wanted to provide. My understanding from Karen is that CDPHE actually has kind of a list of SEPs or special environmental projects available that people can kind of pull from, like a menu. It would be great to put that together here, and that's where having some guidance from you all would be helpful.
Julie, just to clarify, did you say that what is the differentiation between the penalties that do become part of the budget and the ones that are tied to special projects? Is that determined in advance, or how does that work?
If the penalty is payable to COGCC, it's part of our budget. Okay. If a penalty amount is offset by a public project, that's the distinction.
So Priya, the way we structured the Firestone settlement, we structured it so that we established the various projects, and we set it up so that the money is held in escrow, and it doesn't come into our budget, and it goes directly to the vendors for the projects, which means it's not part of our budget.
So that is determined at the time that the penalty is assessed? I'm just trying to figure out, like, when does
Yeah.
that determination? Okay.
We made that determination at the time the penalty was assessed, and it was part of the overall structured deal with Occidental.
Okay.
And again, I echo Julie's point. That was a little unprecedented in terms of depth and scope and breadth and special project oriented sort of thing. So I tend to echo Julie's point that, Karen, if you're aware of how CDPHE or AQCC keeps an ongoing list, that is something that we've not historically done to the best of my knowledge, and that might be something that the capacity of commission with staff's help we could determine. And then it's just sort of, determining, when we have an actual penalty that needs to be assessed, what do we do with that? I think you also need to balance that historically funds that are associated with fines have gone into our budget and have been a component of our plugging and abandoning piece. And going forward, that still remains an important component. So there's some balancing that needs to happen. And Julie, if I'm talking out in left field and I'm all wrong, correct me, but.
Maybe we can have someone from CDPHE's SEP program just come and give a presentation about how they have it set up. It doesn't mean it's the right way, but I think it would be really informative. My understanding is that there's a list of projects, but also, and those projects are not necessarily what CDPHE wants. Sometimes it's an environmental project in a community that's been affected by the type of penalty. Does that make sense? So like a water quality penalty might go to a water quality project. So maybe we can invite them to one of these meetings, just to give a brief presentation on how it works, and then we could figure out if that something similar could work for us. And I guess my point is, we might be able to get more bang for the buck if we could combine, a penalty on our side with a penalty over on the air side, if there's something slightly bigger that we're trying to achieve. And I don't know what the intricacies of that might look like.
Well, and I think it also might be interesting or curious for some of our team to meet with some of AQCC's team and see what are some areas in which we might have some consensus in terms of areas that we might want to look into. I think that was one of the things that came up yesterday as well.
So, kind of in what I've learned in this capacity has just been through the Martinez-Irwin Fund and the Occidental Firestone settlement. And that's a big dollar settlement, and those are big dollar projects. And what I'm wondering is, are there smaller projects, more community, local-based projects that would be available, in those kind of smaller dollar projects that may have, kind of small dollar, big impact on the ground? Do we know of those? Do we have a list? B, might the operators know of good opportunities that, that they're being asked about in the communities within which they are operating? And kind of C, is there an incentive for them to participate or to take on or to offer up a kind of a project in lieu of a cash penalty? And do we engage in that kind of discussion during our enforcement proceedings, our enforcement negotiations from those officers? So those are some questions that I think I'd like to hear from the enforcement team on, because I do think there could be opportunities where an operator may be talking to, a local government or may have an offsetting project nearby from a local conservation organization where they say, hey, these people have been talking to us about this. We can't find it in our budget. If we're going to have to pay, $40,000, $50,000 to you guys anyways, can we just, pony up and take care of these projects that may have a beneficial use to the community and to the state? So that's kind of where my thinking's going on how we can earmark these funds in an appropriate way on the front end, I also want to be cognizant of its impact on our budget if, you know, we're relying on those funds for other things. You know, we obviously don't want to detract from those or divert funds, you know, from things that are otherwise necessary. So those are some questions that I'd be interested in hearing from staff on. I think that'd be appropriate.
Totally. And Bill, we don't have much of a list. I think that projects that have come to us have kind of come out of the issue at hand, or a local government or a landowner, or like, but what's been interesting with the Martinez Irwin is we ended up standing up a page where people could submit projects to us, right? And so maybe we think about how to broaden out that avenue, whether through, you know, local government engagement, engaging with community groups to say, we're trying to understand how we can do more good in the community with our dollar, with potential enforcement dollars. And if you have an idea, put it on here, and then it could be a menu or a list or something to start that conversation.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I was going to say the same thing in that that thinking about like wildlife related projects, you know, you could do some of those for a couple $100,000, you know, or something like that, if that was, and if there was a way to either combine funds, you know, for example, in this case, maybe with CPW, or for example, the state wildlife grant program requires a match that's non-federal. And so maybe these dollars could be the match for the money that they would be getting allocated from the federal government to do a wildlife related project. And especially if there was like a wildlife related penalty or something. So I was thinking about some of these things as well when that conversation came up, but I really love this idea of like coming up with a menu of the different, you know, questions that we might have that we want to have answered. And along the lines of what you said, Bill, maybe not approaching operators only for offering up funds in lieu of penalty, but maybe they could, you know, maybe there's some projects like this that they would be willing to, if they have the budget, you know, to just spend on, you know, just to help kind of support the knowledge base on what's going on with oil and gas and ways we can do things better.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, I'm going to share a link to the CDPHE Supplemental Environmental Projects website. It does have a list of the Suncor settlement, which is a big one going on right now. I don't see a comprehensive list, but I'll make sure I can reach out to Alex Helling, who's the new Supplemental Environmental Project Coordinator, to see if he can provide a comprehensive list of that. Also, you'll find on that website, and it's, I think, just in line with what Director Murphy was suggesting, if maybe, you know, as commissioners are developing their menu or wish list or whatever we call it about potential projects, on that website that I just shared, there's a link to submit an idea. So members of the public are able to submit their own ideas for projects to be considered. And so if at any point you'd like me to help coordinate with Alex Helling, who's the new Supplemental Environmental Projects Coordinator, to provide a presentation to COGCC, I'd be happy to do that. He's actually not within the Air Pollution Control Division. He's within CDPHE's Division of Environmental Health and Sustainability. So we'd probably have to get him, as well as somebody from the Air Pollution Control Division, to be involved in that discussion and that presentation. I'm not totally sure who that might be at this point, but I'm guessing it would probably be a woman by the name of Robin Willey, who heads up CDPH. She's the Air Pollution Control Division's Chief Strategy Officer, and works closely with all of the Air Division's programs, as well as the Air Quality Enterprise. So she would, I think, be pretty valuable to this discussion as well. But yeah, if there's any thing I can do to help set up that meeting, please let me know. And then also just wanted to give you all a heads up that I scheduled a debrief with Tricia Oath and Gary Kaufman. The soonest we were able to get together is April 6th. So I can take back this conversation to them at that point. And, you know, we'll also be discussing some of the ideas that we discussed at the commission hearing yesterday, which is, you know, me providing regular updates to the Air Commission about what COGCC is up to, and then Jeremy Newstifter from the Air Commission providing an update to COGCC. That would be, I think, more detailed and more comprehensive than the weekly updates I provide in my commissioner comments at the weekly COGCC hearings. So yeah, if between now and April 6th, you all can kind of feed me any information that you think would be valuable for me to discuss with Director Kaufman from the Air Division, I'd be happy to include that in our conversation.
I'd like to take that a step further and volunteer Commissioner McGowan to go be that liaison to CDPHE and AQCC that we've been talking about. I actually meant to sort of bring that up yesterday, but I didn't want to put you on the spot there, Karen. But I think that the discussions we're having here, Sean's debrief over there, I think it would be lovely if you could join part of that debrief and sort of listen in and bring that back to us. And so, we've always had Sean, being the liaison to us, but we've never had that liaison back going the other way. And I think we do have it now. I think it's you. I think you're perfectly suited for that. And so throwing it out there, if you would be so willing to step up and put that badge on and go liaise that way, I think that'd be awesome.
Yep, I'd be happy to. And I think, I know that Bill has some interest too, so I want to make sure that where we can, we're sharing responsibilities and interests. So I obviously know folks over there, and I'm happy to do it. They're some of my favorite peeps, but also wanting to make sure that there's space for other folks, if they want to get involved as well. So if anyone else is interested, then let's chat about who wants to tackle what or how we want to set that up.
I appreciate that, Karen. I was going to chime in and say that, hey, it's, that could be a big piece of work to be the sole liaison from COGCC over to, CDPHE and AQCC, and that I am happy and willing and able, well, to the extent that I have, the knowledge base to do so, to be your backup in that regard. And so any chance you get that hey, you're not going to be able to make it, or you think it might be something that you're already well abreast of, and that I could be a good, at the very least, fly on the wall, please let me know, and I will step in and sit in for those opportunities.
And to the extent possible that I can, I've been trying to sit on Air Quality Control Commission meetings just to hear kind of what conversations are happening with them and what's on their agenda.
And I actually am putting that on my notes to discuss with Tricia Oath and Gary Kaufman on the 6th. We had kind of initially envisioned, based on Commissioner Reeder's feedback, that since I'm the liaison, maybe I should present one of the process that we kind of initially thought would work is, the week or two, the weekly hearing, COGCC hearing, a week or two before the monthly AQCC hearing. I could give COGCC commissioners a heads up. Here's what I'm planning on relaying back to them. Please let me know if there's other stuff you want to add. But I'm also going to discuss this alternative option that I really like the idea of potentially Karen, Bill, and I, maybe we all tag team it, or maybe I just completely hand the baton to you all and allow you to provide that debriefing to the Air Commission. So I really appreciate the offer of support there, and I'll see if that's something that the CDPHE side would be interested in taking you up on.
So just to chime in, I do really appreciate this this concept of coming up with meaningful projects and allowing people to propose projects to put on a list, and then vetting those projects to ensure that they are meaningful. Understanding that some projects, there's a couple of different ways to do it. I think that, historically we've had operators that propose projects perhaps as part of their enforcement hearings based on just information that they have or partners that they work with. And that can work, but I also think it's beneficial to have entities and operators propose general projects to put on a list, and then to prioritize that list based on how meaningful it is, and then be able to empower the enforcement staff, the hearing staff, to allow an operator to choose from this prioritized list, particularly not only for in lieu of payments, but also in situations like we've had where there's been operators who were not able to make payments, but perhaps they could contribute to these projects, these public projects, in an in-kind manner instead of in a cash manner, by either providing staff or equipment or whatever their resource ability may be, rather than just letting it go away because they're not able to pay their fine, which we saw, sometime in the last couple of months. So anyway, I want to just express support for that, and I think there's a wide array of potential projects, in different neighborhoods and communities and wildlife projects and air monitoring projects, and I think there's all sorts of opportunities for that, and they don't have to be $500,000 or $1 million projects. They could be $25,000 projects and still be, I think, very impactful. So I do like that.
Are you all interested in having Alex come in the next couple of weeks and just talk about what a STEP is and how it can be used? And CDPHE's had their program for a while, and it might be helpful just to, there's really good basic information on their website, but doesn't really answer some of the questions I think that we're all going to have about, beneficial use of these dollars. And I do think too, I don't think the penalty is completely erased for a STEP. I think some sort of penalty is still paid, and then some portion of it can be used for a beneficial environmental project. So Sean, can we work on inviting Alex and whoever you think is appropriate from the air side to one of our working meetings here in the next couple of weeks if folks are open to that?
Yeah, and I don't think it would be a problem. I'm looking at Alex's calendar right now and see some decent open space there. So I think at least getting a SEP basics presentation from him is not going to be a problem. Getting someone from the air division to talk specifically about their role in it may be a challenge. So I'll try and at the very least we'll get a 101 type presentation from Alex, and then hopefully I'll also get someone from the air division to provide their thoughts on it as well. So you're wanting this to be a Friday session, hopefully in the next week or two?
Yeah, and if it turns into something more official, I think then we take it to an official commission hearing. But for me, this is kind of informational and learning about what the possibilities are. And
sure, yeah, and I can ask next week if that's going to be an option for Alex. The following Friday is actually a furlough day, so that won't be an option. But yeah, let me see what his availability is.
One caveat I would sort of throw out there, or the one piece to this is we don't want to get out ahead of staff here. I just realized that when we were doing the Martinez-Irwin Fund, it was really largely staff driven, both COGCC staff and CDPHE staff. They had the ideas of areas that needed inquiry and projects that were important and helped prioritize those sorts of things. And so I just would, and I'm glad Julie showed back up, just to, keep our staff looped into discussions, because they really are the scientific experts way beyond this commission chair in terms of helping develop up whatever that project check sheet should look like.
That's helpful, Jeff. Thanks for thinking about it, because I didn't. I'll throw it on our managers meeting to make sure our team knows that there's an interest in kind of developing a list. I think generally we've preferred that we put those dollars to use than to just collect them. And so getting a bigger list might be easier than having to invent it on the fly in the midst of other negotiations. But I will flag it. Thank you, Jeff.
And also,
go ahead.
Oh, I had a quick question. If the Friday sessions don't end up working, would one of the Wednesday commission hearings also be fair game for this presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Except for the 31st, please.
And I do think, and I'm just talking structurally here, at least when I think about like these ideas that perhaps come out of these work sessions, really the work sessions are designed to just be ideas, and the intent is not to, do things in lieu of staff, but make sure that we're kind of coming up with ideas and directions and thoughts and brainstorming, and then clearly next step would be to involve staff input and ultimately have staff directly involved with whatever these things are that are coming out of this. So
yeah, and I think also just finding that balance, that we're not ending up creating additional work for staff, beyond what they already have on their plates. And so to the extent that you know, if it makes more sense for us to develop an initial list and for staff to then add on or vet it, or, you know, say, well, this one, you know, this is a higher priority, or those kinds of things. Like, you know, I would, whatever we can do to just, you know, minimize the burden on staff is all I'm thinking. Although I do understand what you were saying, Jeff, with, you know, just making sure that they really have a say in what we end up doing.
Yeah, I was just making sure that we keep them looped into these discussions.
Yeah. And Julie, just another question. I mean, I would imagine, as you said, because these penalties are used for various other needs, from a broad sense, would you see it sort of as if and when we are in a good place and are well covered with other needs, that then we would say, okay, now we have the opportunity to kind of use funds in this way? Or, you know, I'm just trying to also make sure that we're not, like you said, you know, the funds are getting used, typically not held. So striking that.
There's going to be an art to managing that, I think, in the long run, because there are factors in play that could adjust all of this, like in terms of some of the ideas being kicked around for the financial assurance rulemaking, permit fees, and like it will be a question of managing OGCC's revenue streams. And I think that we'll need to be most cognizant of it in years when either production or commodity price is really low. But in those instances, you know, historically, we've never had much of our budget dependent on penalties, because that's not the right business model, I think, for our organization. And so they do play a role in our budget, but we also haven't actively depended on them. And so we'll have to manage it as we go. It's really along where I should have stopped at the beginning.
Sounds good.
Hey, I've got a couple other thoughts, if it's okay. So one, well, I mean, I think it was pretty clear at the end of the meeting that there was some capacity questions from the Air Quality Control Commission itself, as far as wanting to meet more often or engage with us more often. I still don't want to give up on Karen's idea, which was the potential development of smaller work groups, because I'm guessing that there probably is, you know, a couple of those commissioners that may be interested in engaging with us in a smaller work group type setting, and to also help with that coordination. And so, you know, I wouldn't discount that option. And perhaps, Sean, you could be the liaison there to see if there's any interest in exploring that. And I don't know I can't remember what those small work group topics would be or what the goals would be, but I still think that there's some value to that as far as coordinating and importantly, you know, continuing to develop the relationships between the commissions. And so, and I'm talking commissioner to commissioner, right? Because I know that those relationships are strong and functional at the staff level. And so there's that. And then there's the other piece that and I'm brainstorming here. But you know, I appreciated the presentation yesterday on climate equity, and certainly understand the goals around disproportionately impacted communities and the different criteria around that. And it was mentioned, but you know, I'm continuing to hear, particularly from one of the rural parts of the state, this concern around the impacts of either regulations or greenhouse gas emission goals that may have on rural economies and rural jobs. And I know we've got an Office of Just Transition, and there's a lot of work that's being done around just transition, and it's just in its infancy. And while some of that initially was going to be focused around, you know, coal mining communities, you know, I wouldn't mind learning a little more about that just transition and what's going on, and seeing how, as we're looking at this climate equity piece, if we can also be looking at, how some of these things are going to be affecting, the equity and economies of our rural areas around the state. And so I'm not sure exactly how to approach that, but I do think it's an important topic, and it's one that I keep getting questions about. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that and help be a part of the solution there.
And on that note about smaller work groups, I guess I can talk again with Julie and Tricia Oath about that. It does seem like there's going to be some pretty significant pushback from commissioners based on the conversation yesterday. I don't know what capacity most of them have. There might be one or two who are interested in participating in those discussions. And then of course, the challenge also is that's an additional workload burden on staff to help staff those work group sessions up and get those ready. But I can take that back.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to acknowledge, I appreciate you bringing that forward about the, the office of, the transitions and the impacts that some of the other communities are feeling, and figuring out ways we can get engaged. I guess I'm, in part, I was sort of quiet after you said that, because I was just thinking that there's so much there, and I'm not sure where and how we start, but would love to continue thinking through that and figuring out what ways we can engage in that. So thanks for bringing that forward.
Yeah, and for me, it's just really learning about what it means, just like with climate equity, what that means, what is the demographics, what are the impacts, what are the alternatives?
Yeah.
What are the alternatives? And then, and just educating ourselves in that so that we, are aware. And then, I know that there's strong thinking being done through the Office of Just Transition, as well as, nationally and globally around this topic. And so, for me, it's an interesting topic, and one that I think it's something that we should know about. So.
The only other thing that from the AQCC joint meeting that I had was, which is also sort of what Bill raised earlier, Bill and Karen, I guess, with the kind of looking back at what the predicted, or what the forms say in terms of estimated emissions, and then the actuals. And I think it was Commissioner Aaron's at the end also said something about summarizing like the form 2A and 2B. Like I think he said yearly or quarterly, at least that's what my notes say. I don't know if I correctly recorded that, but I was just curious from Julie if, how easy, difficult, how much of a lift that would be in terms of looking at, what's provided on the forms and summarizing that on a periodic basis that we could then provide to them to be looking at in terms of their considerations for future rulemaking, or as they're looking at the comparison with the actuals.
I think it depends. I mean, I don't remember his question very precisely now. I know that he wanted, but and we're talking about for permits that have been approved versus in process.
Yeah, I think he was just saying that the form 2A and 2B that come to us, he was asking if there was a way to summarize them on a periodic basis. And then because they're doing their own monitoring and getting the actuals, this is sort of tying into this idea of a look back, and, if we can identify, as Bill was noting earlier, if there are how well they align, are there gaps, are there, pieces that we need to kind of re-examine, and and then they were thinking about it, or he was mentioning this in terms of, thinking about it with respect to future rulemaking, I think, on their end.
It's hard. I don't honestly know. Because I'm not quite sure what's the volume of 2As, 2Bs that we get in. They're going to be the best source of information, and then trying to distill down. I think that might be a place that it's best to kind of let the two staff groups work through, right? Because I don't exactly know what information would be most useful to APCD staff, and we might have to kind of work that out in tandem. In terms of reporting out what comes in, I guess I think that it feels like a fair amount of resources, and I'm not sure what the long-term upside is to have quarterly updates on it, but I could be totally wrong about that too.
And to be fair, I think he said yearly or quarterly. So I think it was more related to what was possible. But I think, and maybe this is even a work group, possibility where a few folks from, our side and their side are working together, and maybe with a commissioner or two.
And we will be reporting about the 2B annually, right? That's the CIDR report in 904. So I feel good about that. It's the interim steps that makes me a little bit more nervous, and I don't know what kind of resources it takes to kind of compile that, if it's manual or if it could be automated. Those are the questions that I would need to work through, and also kind of having for me, a closer connection of what value it provides to APCD. And so maybe that's a question, Sean, we can add to one of our next staff meetings of, is there interim data or that would be helpful for their policy setting or operational functions.
Julie, in our 2Bs, when those are getting filed, and they're getting filed all electronically now, do they go into like a database where each field could be queried out? And what I'm getting at is that if there's a spot for estimated emissions from an OGDP, from a project, if we went back on an annual basis and just queried out the total on that, right? As part of your report, it may not be as precise as what we're talking about now, but kind of as a start saying, hey, here's the estimated emissions that we're coming off of these 150 projects or whatever they were, whatever it ends up being at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps you just send that over to the CDPHE, and they say, hey, here's, of those 150 projects, here's what we monitored on however many they did. And that might be a way to coordinate that, where we can provide what Commissioner Ahrens was asking for, but also wouldn't be an additional burden beyond kind of your CIDR annual report, just kind of a component there. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if that's possible. I'm not an IT guy, and I don't get in those forums myself. So I'll leave that up to you and you guys.
Yeah, and the reason we built it in a database, Bill, is to be able to do just those kinds of queries. But like each time we develop a different query or a different frequency, it takes somebody to manage it. And so that's the piece that I'm kind of trying to weigh out and better understand. But yes, I think in the long run, the idea is to pull that out. The challenge to me is, if we really want to get into the nuts and bolts of comparison, we need to understand what was approved versus what was constructed and where in construction it is, right? To compare estimates to actuals. And that gets into a pretty in-depth line by line piece, which is where I tend to think a better solution in the long run is trying to get two databases that talk to each other that can do that work for us. But that's a really expensive proposition. And I also apologize. I need to drop off. There's an email in your inbox from a complainant that I want to follow up on. And a good flag to you that I'm checking on it right now, and we'll go from there. So,
Julie, just before you drop off, can you remind me, or maybe one of the other commissioners has a better memory than me. And by the way, I learned that there's such a thing as coronavirus brain, and I have it. So that's my defense. When we're asking for air emission estimates from industry when they apply for their permit, are we asking for annual estimates or the lifetime of the well?
I wish Joel was here, because I don't remember.
Because I think it's going to be hard for us to compare, because I'm guessing that CDPHE is asking for annual data.
Yep.
And so again, I'm just getting stuck on
how we're
going to use.
Look at this.
Here's Joel. How we're going to use what we're doing like, are we doing the right things? Are our regulations helping or hurting? I'm really just stuck on how we're going to connect all the dots.
That's a great question, Commissioner McGowan, and I will apologize. I was not anticipating to appear, so please forgive my t-shirt. But so this is absolutely a conversation that COGCC staff had with Commissioner Putnam and APCD staff as we were developing Rule 303A5 and sort of the specific emissions that we were asking for on cider. So the answer is they are annual emissions. It's measured in tons per year. And there are two sets of pollutants, right? So there are the pollutants that we put in the air quality category, which are essentially criteria pollutants, so things that have NACs associated with them, as well as greenhouse gases like methane. And then separately, there are sort of the public health categories, which are BTECs and other pollutants that are likely to have human health impacts that are known as hazardous air pollutants in the air quality world. I think probably for our purposes right now of your question, the most interesting comparison is probably in that criteria pollutants, because there are criteria pollutant sort of emissions estimates involved in a air quality permit, and then after the fact reporting through the Reg 7 inventory. And the system was designed to allow for direct comparison, but it's worth noting that how that comparison works will, one, take a while, and two, be a little bit nuanced, because what we're getting in cider are forward-looking estimates of what emissions are likely to be. And I think that data can help the air quality folks in sort of planning and other efforts. But what we don't know is, one, how accurate those estimates are, right? I think often advanced estimates might not always correlate with what happened on the ground. So it's important to keep that in mind. There are things like emissions factors that can be used sort of both after the fact and beforehand to sync those up, but that might not always be the case. And I think more importantly, we actually don't know when the development associated with our Form 2B applications will occur or whether it will occur, right? It's entirely possible an operator will get an OGDP with, say, 3 Form 2As attached, and they will ultimately build 2 of those locations, but for whatever reason, choose not to build the 3rd location. And of course, an OGDP is valid for 3 years. So we don't know when within that 3-year time period, the location will actually be built. So, we will start to get a forward-looking database that will, I think by year 5, be a really valuable tool for sort of a direct comparison against the annual emissions inventory, right? But it won't be a perfect apples to oranges comparison. So I think the benefit that Commissioner Putnam and folks at APCD saw specifically was first in that sort of projection, what's coming, right? That helps them. And 2, looking at the types of forward-looking emissions factors and other tools operators use to estimate those emissions beforehand, which again isn't something that APCD necessarily gets to sort of compare that against the metrics and emissions factors that operators are using after the fact. So there will be some value in the aggregate data and also value in the sort of case-by-case tools that operators use to see whether and how they might be different than the tools that they're using in the Reg 7 inventory reporting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of some of the potential applications for the data, at least in the short term, and then in the longer term, the more apples to apples comparison might be possible.
Thanks, Joel, that's helpful.
Others?
I don't have anything more on that particular topic, but just a quick thing, a couple things I guess I could mention if we're ready to just kind of go around, unless anybody else had something else they wanted to discuss.
Go for it.
Okay, so just super quick, I'm continuing to figure out how and when to start on the biological resources working group. I've got a meeting with CPW next week, and I'm gonna just kind of talk to them a little bit about anything, to keep in mind or how they want to be involved in that. But hopefully we'll get that rolling in the next few weeks, I would say, a few weeks to a month at the most. In between there, we've finally actually booked plane tickets for my parents to actually move out here. So that's going to be happening in the middle of April. And so that's going to be taking up some of my time in between there. So if not before, then probably after that. And then I, just in case anybody didn't get a chance to look, there's some draft questions for all of you to take a look at with the interim and final reclamation. It's not for a while, so it's no big rush, but I just want to make sure that you saw that. And was just hoping to get info from you by early April. I think I said maybe the 7th or something like that. And that way, if there's anybody else we want to invite or anything else I need to give staff a heads up on presenting to us, you know, can make sure that they have plenty of time. So that's all I have.
Just a quick question. The e-forms docket, I noticed there was a couple of additional ones that went in over the last couple of days. As far as everyone knows, is that complete now?
Yeah, thanks I was going to speak to that. So staff is still working on a couple of things with regard to e-forms. And I think that we've had a couple of issues with this informational docket and the initial use of e-forms that has happened as a result of that. I think that we and our stakeholders have gotten used to documents being emailed in, and then staff turns them into a Google Drive and it's readily accessible, and there you go. Well, that's not the method of doing business now that we have our e-forms filing system, and so everything is filed via e-forms. And I want to get on the front page of our website an instructional sheet, because right now, if you go to our website, it's not self-evident how to go find the documents that were actually filed in the informational docket. And I don't think that's the sort of non-transparency that we're looking for. So staff is going to be working on putting information on the front page of the website that is instructions on how to go find the informational dockets that have been filed. That was not your question, John, but I wanted to get that out there as a prelude to answering your question. There were a bit of a hiccup on the filing day of March 15th at around 5 p.m. and evidently everybody was trying to get their documents in and the system froze up of some sort. And so staff worked with those that did not get their documents in by the deadline to get the documents in over the course of the next day or so. And so that has now happened, and all documents are now in. And so for commissioners, I know what I've done is I've just gone in and I've just downloaded them to my laptop. I think it's just easier than trying to read them in the e-file system. So however you want to do it, but they all should be accessible. The final piece to it is when we all went in and looked at the e-filing system, there was not a label so there were several different labels. One label was the email of the filer. Another label said public comment, but it didn't identify actually who the interested party was. And so our OIT folks are working on creating a label that says interested party and like by name, so that when you go in, you can go, if you're interested in party X's comments, you could go scroll to party X and then open that up. So that also is being worked on. So for the 11 attendees that are listening in, that's our effort at finding that we had some hiccups and trying to establish some workarounds so that this system is more workable. And I think it is just a positive irony that this is happening in a non-official rulemaking so that we can work through these hiccups so that when we do have an official rulemaking, or we do have, you know, official filings in e-filing, we'll have a system that is more workable and more transparent for all of us.
Just one other question about that. So, I mean, to me, the most efficient way of finding all the information, the associated information, is the utilization of the docket number. But I'm not sure how the public knows what the docket number is, and so I don't know how to resolve that one.
Well, I think if the world becomes, if our website is where we want it to end up being, that little informational instruction sheet on the front page of the website would also contain the docket number. And I, you know, what I'm hopeful it's going to say is, like, go to the filing system, click on search by docket number, insert docket number XYZ, and then the page will populate with all the information. And I agree with you. That's the easiest.
So you would anticipate having that instructional piece for each, well, obviously not each docket, but for these bigger kind of rulemaking dockets, right?
Yeah, I think I'm envisioning having it for each of the bigger rulemakings that we're going to do. I also think it might be helpful to have on the homepage, you know, our new rules have interested parties have much more of an ability to be involved in OGDPs. And I think it would be helpful to have some instructions on how to be involved in that. And so, you know, and again, this is more operational, but I've taken it upon myself, you know, to email Scott Cuthbertson and Elias and John Peskin and some of our hearings officers that I think these are some just really easy tools that we can develop to help the stakeholders that are out there be involved in our processes.
Well, and I think, Jeff, you're a good bellwether, because if you can figure it out, anyone can, right? That's right.
Precisely.
And if commissioners didn't have other things to discuss, I did want to provide a quick update from the request from the Erie community for CDPHE to do air quality monitoring. So we've been busy behind the scenes, shaking the trees and trying to get air quality monitoring equipment to fall out, and we've succeeded. So it looks very likely that hopefully early next week, possibly end of next week at the latest, we'll be able to install a VOC sensor on Oxy's property near the May J and Papa Joe Yellowhammer pads there. We're thankful for Oxy working with us. They're letting us place their equipment, co-locate it with one of their sensors. And this is kind of a first for us, and we're hoping it's a sign of things to come, and collaboration with the industry going forward to help verify their monitoring that they're going to be required to do under regulation number 7. And then also we'll be installing a second unit, hopefully with a SUMA canister that will provide us with more high quality data to the south of the pad at a resident's property there. And the Erie mayor, town administrator, and their contractor has been really helpful in making that happen. So just wanted to provide you that with that little update. Hopefully very soon we'll be able to get some monitoring equipment out there.
Really appreciate that update, Sean. I know that we've heard a lot from Erie folks, and we're trying to be responsive, and I think that the town government has recognized that the good work on your part, on Director Murphy's part, in terms of being responsive, and that's the right thing to do. I appreciate Oxy working with us on that. So great work there, getting that up and running. The last little piece I've got is just we are set for local government informational presentation part 2 next Wednesday, and we will have 4 different presenters. They'll be presenting independently because each local government does their sort of oil and gas work independently, but it looks like it's a panel, but it's really not. But we'll have Jason Maxey from Weld County present, followed by Greg Dean from Adams County, Elizabeth Paranos from the city of Aurora and some of the affiliated local governments, and then David Bumgarten, who was formerly the Gunnison County attorney, has since retired, but has a great deal of history and wealth of information from the West Slope. So I've asked each of them to present for about 15 minutes and then reserved, 15 minutes or so for Q&A from commissioners and dialogue with them about that. And hopefully that'll be a well-rounded initial set of information from local governments on how they're doing their business under SB 19181. And I guess the other piece to that is John and I have authored a letter to all the rest of the local governments in the state with an offer, but that between he and I, we would be happy to give a presentation about what, SB 19181 and COGCC in the in 2021 and beyond, and where we are and where we're going. I noted this morning that CML has sent that out to all, that's Colorado Municipal League for those that are unaware of the acronym, but that went out via an email blast to all of its constituents this morning. So John, I think you and I, our plates will fill up here fairly soon, and I think that's a great thing. And it's a part of that additional transparency that we're trying to create with our local government partners. So.
Agreed.
What else? Anything else for the good of the cause this morning? All right, well, seeing none, everybody go back to your financial assurances homework and keep reading and digging and querying yourself about all that. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. The work session on Friday, March 19th is over. Have a good weekend.
Good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.